Hey, it's Terry with Something Spooky. We are going to be talking about The Invisible Man 2020 in this video. This is not my full review of the video, so I won't be doing all of my thoughts and kind of reviews and evaluations of the movie. Look for that video soon, The Invisible Man review by Something Spooky. Today I'm going to be speaking very specifically to this idea that I had upon watching it. And I just watched it last night. I watched it twice in a row and then watched some of the special features, so I really liked it. Spoiler. But I'm making the case that The Invisible Man 2020 is the best Universal monster movie since the original Wolfman in 1941. So that's more than 80 years of Universal monster movies, and I think that this is arguably the best one in a very long time. So I'm going to dive right into that. First of all, the most important thing maybe for a monster is that the Invisible Man is scary. The Invisible Man feels like a threatening monster in a way that Universal monsters haven't in a long time. We're going to go through a lot of the movies that I am saying this has surpassed. But, since I think 1941's Wolfman, the Universal monsters haven't been very scary. I love them. I'm a huge Universal monster fan. I should say that at the gate. I've seen all of the movies in this 30 film collection that they put out at least. So all of the, kind of prime Universal monster movies. I watch the big ones, Dracula and Frankenstein, at least once a year, often more than that. Read all about them. I mean, that's why I'm into horror. So I'm saying this as somebody who absolutely loves Universal monsters, but they haven't been scary in a long time. Even in the later runs of the original, Universal Monster series, they had started leaning towards comedy with things like, The Mummy's Hand and Abbott and Costello Meet Frankenstein and The Invisible Man. So, they were already kind of becoming this different entity than what they started as while they were still in their original run. And, that led all the way up to the Creature from the Black Lagoon movies, one of the movies we're going to talk about the most today in comparison. And while I love that movie and I love the creature, I don't know that he's very scary. I guess he probably was at the time. But, other than that, a lot of the newer Universal monster movies have been objectively not scary, or they're scary. They're kind of scary in the superficial way. Like I love the original not the original Mummy. I love that movie too. But the Brendan Fraser Mummy from 1999 has some scary elements. We're going to talk about that a bit. And the Wolfman, we're going to talk about that movie from 2010, was definitely meant to be scary. But they felt like they were just kind of horror movies. They didn't feel like a scary, threatening monster the way that this new Invisible Man does. And that's important. That's a big thing for these classic monsters to actually feel scary in a modern sense. I kind of thought that maybe that was impossible. That, these guys were just so well known now, such a part of pop culture and so ubiquitous in Halloween stores and in children's toys and stuff that, Frankenstein is just never going to be scary again. Like really, not in the way that new horror movies are scary. But The Invisible Man is scary, and it's scary in a new way that really speaks to fears of our time. And that's impressive that they've done that with this character. Also, very quickly, it's a very well-crafted movie, and a lot of the monster movies that I love are not. They are what they are. They're a lot of fun, but they're not like expertly made movies. I don't think many people would make the case for a lot of those. I mean, the originals certainly were for their time, the James Whale films and Todd Browning's Dracula and stuff, but as they have kind of turned more and more into just fodder for what they are, certainly we've seen that quality decrease. And, even recent attempts like the Dark Universe movies are certainly not well-made movies. And this one really is. It is, it has great acting. It has great cinematography, great mise-en-scène. The direction is good. I mean, just everything about it. The music's good. It's just a really well-made movie in a kind of formal sense that even people who don't, consider themselves horror fans could, I think, appreciate this movie. It also has meaning and messages, and it has real human intrigue in a way that is often kind of like artificially created in horror movies or monster movies. But in this one, like, you really care about what's going on with the characters, and you are really kind of left hanging on every scene as to what's going to happen next. Like, you feel that tension all through the movie, and it has all kinds of different meanings and messages that you could interpret from it. I won't get too far into any of those now. I'm actually going to talk about some of that in another video I have planned. I'm going to be releasing a lot of Invisible Man content this week. I'm actually calling it the Invisible Man Weekend for Something Spooky. So check back for more thoughts on its meaning and messages, but that is definitely a strength for this movie. It also shows us things that we haven't seen before. Like, it feels very fresh. It feels like a new horror movie that is pushing boundaries, which is what, of course, the original Universal monster movies were. When Frankenstein and Dracula came out in 1931, you know, that was shocking to people. Like, that's why those movies have always been so timeless, is because when they first came out, there wasn't anything else like them. And this is, you know, maybe not to that extent here almost 100 years later, but it does feel like a very new horror movie that is doing new things that are very inventive and are kind of challenging us in ways that I haven't really felt in a horror movie. So I think that's important too, that it's able to tap into that kind of vein. Okay, so that's why I think this movie is so great. I'm going to stack it up kind of quickly here against some of the movies that I'm saying it has rose past, because I don't want to say that without examining that. And in fact, in preparation of this last night, I rewatched The Wolfman 2010, which I really like, always have, and the 1999 Mummy with Brendan Fraser, which I'm also going to be doing a video on. And I mean, that movie is a classic. I think, you know, we'll talk about that in a minute, but that movie is excellent too. So I don't want to say this and The Creature from the Black Lagoon without doing my homework, without doing my research, and I have as much as I can. So I'm going to make this as quick as I can going through these movies. So let's start with the most contemporary comparisons, which are the Dark Universe movies, The Mummy with Tom Cruise and Dracula Untold. And, you know, I'm not going to spend a lot of time on those movies because I think those movies are awful and insulting. And I really, really am disappointed. I mean, I am so hard to disappoint with when I'm like really just like willing to accept something for what it is and enjoy it. And I could not enjoy those movies at all as a big Universal Monster fan. So I am not going to spend much time on those. This was actually originally going to be in the Dark Universe, The Invisible Man. It had Johnny Depp attached to it to play the Invisible Man. And thank God we didn't get that movie. You know, I like Johnny Depp, no offense, but like this movie is just so different from what those movies were that I'm really glad that this is kind of the breaking point where we're leaving that other stuff behind. And hopefully with this movie being a success, we move forward from here. So definitely better than the Dark Universe, you know, at me about that. I will defend that to the grave. The Wolfman 2010, I really like The Wolfman. I think it is very underrated. I don't think it gets its due. It's really well done in a slasher movie for the time, splat pack kind of gore movie, horror movie, but it's also very much a love letter to movie monsters, and it has a lot of like nods and winks to the original movie and, you know, all of these classic movies if you like them. So I really like The Wolfman. It has a lot of problems. I'm also going to do a video on that. There's going to be all kinds of, you know, Universal Monster content out the gate here because that's my favorite thing in horror. So I'm not going to talk about any of these too specifically, but The Wolfman is good. I do like it, but it has a lot of flaws. It is, you know, not a very well-made movie in the ways that I was talking about earlier. It has a great cast, but the acting's blah. You know, it kind of goes overboard in trying to fit into the horror themes of the time. It feels kind of insincere in some of its like slasher splat pack stuff, and like they're just doing it because and it certainly just doesn't have like the emotional resonance and intellect of The Invisible Man. So I love The Wolfman, sorry Wolfman, but I think The Invisible Man definitely eclipses that. So I think maybe the biggest contender here is The Mummy, 1999, which again, I watched again last night. I've seen over and over through my life. I love that movie. It's a classic. That's actually gonna be the theme of the movie about, or the video about it. But, you know, it also is not a super well-made movie. There is a lot of cheese and, you know, a lot of it's intentional, but some of it does feel like just kind of the limitations of how they are working too. It just doesn't feel like as smart of a movie as The Invisible Man, which is okay. That's not always what you want. You know, sometimes you want that blockbuster fun movie, and that's what The Mummy's meant to be, and it does that as well as almost any movie ever. I love The Mummy. But in terms of being a monster movie and making the Universal monsters kind of true to what they originally were and still can be, I think The Invisible Man surpasses it. And the first Mummy movie in particular does have some great mummy content. You know, it has a lot of scares kind of, and it is still a horror movie. So like I said, I think it may be the closest contender on this list, but The Invisible Man I think is just a little more well-tuned, a little, you know, more fit for being a film in just kind of the academic sense, and that just pushes it over the top for me in this sense. But again, you know, it's been 20 years for The Mummy, so it's kind of unfair to do that direct comparison, and all of these lists are kind of arbitrary, but you know, we'll see how The Invisible Man ages. But at the time, I think that this is the most effective Universal Monsters have felt. So then we're going to jump way back, and there are some other examples in between, but I think the next kind of big pillar that somebody might make a case for is Creature from the Black Lagoon, which is 1955, I believe, and right in there. And, you know, I love Creature from the Black Lagoon, and it is a very important movie. It is iconic design, you know, all the underwater scenes, and I'm going to talk about that more, I'm sure. And it's a really, really good classic monster movie, even though it itself came like 25 years after Frankenstein and Dracula, you know, like as we move away from these things, they all kind of start to blend in together. But like that was a long time after the original Universal monster films. So in a way, it's like that movie also reinvented them and kind of revitalized them for a generation. That's right when a lot of people were watching monster movies on TV, you know, with horror hosts and that whole Monster Kid scene. And the Creature from the Black Lagoon is kind of the most, you know, 1950s scientific, you know, radioactive monster. It's not that exactly, but like that kind of feel, which is what was happening in science fiction and horror movies at the time, but in a Universal monster sense. So it did update a lot for the Universal monsters. And so I don't put it down at all. I don't mean to, you know, take anything away from it. It kind of just goes back to the Invisible Man being a more, you know, auteur of a movie, a more filmmaker's movie, where Creature from the Black Lagoon, I love it, is still feels like it's kind of working from this blueprint from a bygone age, even at that point. And, you know, it's not really pushing any boundaries or challenging anything. It's still just like a monster creeping around and like carrying, you know, monster carrying a girl. And it's great. I love it. But it's not really reinventing the formula or challenging things the same way that the Invisible Man 2020 has. So then there is the Abbott and Costello movies. I'm actually going to kind of leave those out of here, but I just want to make sure that I don't ignore them. I don't think you can make a comparison there, just like you really can't. I see people try to compare Abbott and Costello meets Frankenstein to the other Universal monster movies and, you know, whether or not they like that. I love those movies, but you can't really look at them the same way. You know, it's then especially when you're talking about an actual horror movie like The Invisible Man, there's just really no comparison there. So we're just going to move on. You have all the 1940s Universal monster movies. So there's like House of Dracula, House of Frankenstein, all the Mummy sequels. You know, pretty much like a big chunk of those monster sequels that were just kind of thrown out real quickly. And like, I like those movies. They're a lot of fun. I watch them frequently, but I think you'd be hard pressed with anyone to make a case that any of those movies are actually better than this new Invisible Man. That brings me to maybe the most controversial. I'm not sure. My vision on this movie feels a little skewed, but it's also the last one, and that's The Phantom of the Opera in 1943 with Claude Rains. I don't like that movie all that much. I mean, it has a lot of good things about it, but it just does not click with me. I've tried to watch it over and over, and I know the defenses for it. So some people might object to that also above or being below The Invisible Man, but for me, it's really no contest. So then that brings us to The Wolfman in 1941, and I think that's where the train stops, because The Wolfman is a very, very good movie still, you know, 80 years later, and it's very scary still in some senses. I mean, it's not like really scare you, but it has a lot of things that make you think in the way that horror is supposed to still today. It still resonates. So if you follow that, you know, that's where I'm going to stop this comparison. But there's not much before that. That's only 10 years after Dracula and Frankenstein in 1931. So really what I'm saying is that I think The Invisible Man 2020 is one of the best Universal monster movies ever, and that it stands right up there with the top of the rest of them and all the best movies in the franchise. And I hope that we see its impact in that same way on Universal's future plans with this series. So I'm going to keep talking about The Invisible Man a lot this weekend. Like I said, I have an Invisible Man weekend planned for something spooky. There's going to be a few more videos like this, just talking about specific angles of The Invisible Man in the Last Word segment. There's also going to be a full-fledged Invisible Man review that I'm going to get up, plus some extra content with things talking about the Wolfman and the Mummy, like we've started to get into here. So hope you enjoyed it. Let me know what you think of The Invisible Man. Let me know how you think it ranks against other Universal monster movies. Like the video, share it with friends, and follow Something Spooky. Thanks.